Before we decided on the topic for today's discussion, I asked Matthew to send a questionnaire around about what kind of topics people would like to hear about. And most of them had to do with pretty much the nuts and bolts of meditation, how you do breath meditation, how you deal with the hindrances, how you do goodwill meditation. So that's going to be the topic for today. And before we get to the nuts and bolts, I'd like to talk a little bit about kind of what we're trying to nut and bolt together, which is a state of mind. And that has to do to understand how the Buddha describes breath meditation and the processes of meditation in general. It's important to realize that he sees the mind as primarily proactive. We're not simply receiving impulses from outside and then reacting to them. We're going out and actively shaping our experience. And this is something we do on a day-to-day basis in all aspects of our life. And meditation is going to involve that too. We have to be shaping first a state of concentration through our mindfulness, through our right efforts to get the mind to settle down. The technical term, we talked about this a little bit last night, is a state of becoming, in which you are taking on an identity in a particular world of experience. For example, you have a desire for chocolate, and you're sitting here, okay, I'd like to have some chocolate. There's some chocolate down on Hawthorne Street. And the you in that particular becoming is the you who's going to benefit from having the chocolate, and the you who's going to be able to get the chocolate. Do you have the monetary resources? Do you have the abilities to walk down the street to get the chocolate? All that is the you that is involved in that. And the fact that you're a Democrat or a Republican or an independent at this point doesn't matter. Okay, they will take care of their money no matter what. And chocolate is still good no matter what. As for the world outside that's relevant, just what's getting in the way of your getting the chocolate and what you can actually do to provide the chocolate out there in the world, that becomes that relevant world for that experience, for that particular state of becoming, that particular desire. Other things that are not relevant to the chocolate at that time will not be part of that world. And you look at your mind, as you go through the day, you're going through many, many worlds, many, many identities within those worlds. And that's a process that we're going to try to undo. And the best way to undo it first, though, is to create a state of becoming in the mind that is solid and secure, which is what concentration is all about. And the process that the Buddha calls putting together here is, I've translated as fabrication. It's how you put things together in your experience. And all this comes from, as I said, comes from desire. So the desire has a role here not only as part of the problem, but also part of the solution. You have to want to put things together. The analogy given in the canon, this Brahmin came to see Ananda one time and asked, this path that you're following, what are the results of the path? And Ananda said, one of the results is you put an end to desire. And then the Brahmin said, well, how do you do that? And Ananda gave what are called the 4 bases of success, or the 4 bases of power. And the first one is desire. And the Brahmin said, wait a minute, how are we going to use desire to put an end to desire? That's impossible. And Ananda said, well, before you came to the park, which is where Ananda was staying, did you have the desire to come here? Yes. And now that you're here, where is that desire? The desire is gone, because it's been attained. In the same way, you use the desire on the path, and once the path has been constructed and it does its work, then you can put the path aside, you can put that desire aside. So we're working on our desires. So the desire to get the mind concentrated is not a bad thing. What you're doing as you're fabricating your experience through desire is you're working on potentials that are coming in from the past that you then create into your actual experience. In the Buddha's description of dependent co-arising, the process of fabrication actually comes prior to your experience of the senses. So there's a certain drive that goes out to see and to hear and to engage in the senses in other ways, and that actually comes prior to the input that's coming in from the senses outside. Which is why, you have a film like Rashomon. 7 different people looking at the same thing, and they give 7 different stories because they are coming at that experience from different perspectives with different desires in mind. Did you ever see the Russ Chaz version of Rashomon? It was a disagreement between a guy and a woman on the street over a parking space. And all the people in New York or around in that block all had their comments on, whether the guy was obviously a male chauvinist pig or whether the woman was being outrageous. all based on what you're coming from or where you're coming from as you have these experiences. And when the Buddha talks about just even the aggregates you're putting together, your feeling, your immediate feeling that you have, and there's your sense of your body that you have, your feelings, your perceptions, your fabrications. In every case, there's a potential or a series of potentials coming in from the past that you then create into the actual experience of a feeling or a perception or a state of consciousness. So it's a very radically deep process that's going on here that we're going to be trying to uncover. The reason we're suffering is because once we've created these aggregates, we try to feed on them. We talked about that a little bit last night, that the Buddha equates clinging with feeding. The word in Pali is the same word, upadana. You hold on to something, you're basically clinging, feeding on it. So we're trying to get some pleasure out of the sense of form or sense of feeling, perceptions, fabrications, consciousness. And it's in trying to feed on these things that we suffer. So what we're going to try to do is see that they're really not worth creating. And once you see that they're not worth creating, then you stop the process, and then you don't have, and however, you have to feed the mind in the meantime. Otherwise, it's going to go out and nibble on the side and pretend that it's not nibbling. So you've got to be very clear about how you're going to find some nourishment. So you have to fabricate a state of concentration, which is part of fabricating the path. Then when the Buddha talks about fabrication, he divides it into many different categories, but the categories that are most relevant to us are what we call the three fabrications that are given in one of the readings that we'll look at. Basically, bodily, verbal, and mental. Bodily fabrication is just the way you breathe in and out. And that's how you create your sense of having the body. If you were not breathing, you wouldn't sense the body, or at least you wouldn't sense the shape of the body. I mean, it is possible to get the mind into states of concentration where the breath stops. And at that point, your sense of the body begins to start dissolving, the edges begin to start dissolving. It's because the way you breathe in, breathe out, that movement of energy is what kind of defines your sense of the body you've got sitting here. It's bodily fabrication. The second one, verbal fabrication, is what the Buddha calls directed thought and evaluation. And basically this means focusing on a topic and then commenting on the topic. The noise over there. Why is that person making that noise when I want to be quiet? That kind of, okay, you've directed your thought to that noise over there, whatever that thing was that the guys weren't using. And then there's the commentary that your mind runs on that. And that's your kind of, it's your internal chatter. Talk to yourself about this, that, and the other thing. And this is verbal fabrication. And then finally there's mental fabrication, which are feelings and perceptions. Feelings, of course, are feeling tones of pleasure, pain, neither pleasure nor pain. And the perceptions and the labels you place on things, which can either be individual words or images, sort of visual images that the mind can kind of see. And these provide the raw material for your internal chatter. So sort of mental fabrication provides the raw material, and then you shape these things into sentences and commentaries and questions and whatnot, and those are your verbal fabrications. So these things go together. And in creating a state of concentration, you're going to be using all three of these things. You're focusing on the breath as your topic. It's your main topic. You are directing your thoughts and evaluating the breath. And then you're creating feelings through the breath. And then you're using perceptions of the breath to sort of help regulate how you're going to be experiencing the breath. And we'll get into some of those perceptions in a minute. So that's what the Buddha has to say about fabrication. I'd like to add here a little comment about how it's useful to think of the mind as being like a committee. There are lots of little fabricators going on in the mind at any one particular point, and they're talking to one another. And sometimes they refuse to talk to one another, and that's when you get schizoid. And this part of the mind will talk to this part of the mind, and that part of the mind talks to that part of the mind. It's kind of like America right now, and then there's a problem. And so you notice that part of the mind, as you're getting to meditate, is in line with your idea that you want to meditate, because underlying all this fabrication is the Buddha's equation of fabrication with intention. There are intentions in the mind. You want certain things to be a certain way, where you want to do a certain thing based on those intentions. And there's kind of a battle in the mind about who wants to do what and who's going to win out. And the members of the mind, as you'll find when we're dealing, especially when dealing with the hindrances, they have their tricks. Again, just like political advertisements. They have their ways of making you want to think in a particular way so that you will go in their way. And sometimes the conversations in the mind are, like the nice conversations that the governing committee here at the center gets together, and everybody talks and chats, and they're very very polite with one another. And other times it's like the Chicago City Council. You've got things going on behind the scenes and under the table. And part of the meditation is learning how to see those things and resolve the issues in the direction you want them to go. As we're fabricating a path, these fabrications have a clear role especially clear in three of the factors of the path. One is right resolve, i.e. what you are intending to do. The definition of right resolve is resolve to get past sensuality, resolve to have no ill will, and the resolve not to be harmful. These are the resolves that are based on your realization that you don't want to cause anyone any suffering. Of those, the one that requires the most explanation is sensuality. Sensuality is not just simply sensual pleasures, it's our fascination with thinking about sensual pleasures and planning for sensual pleasures. Suppose you have that chocolate. It takes 5 minutes to eat the chocolate? Unless you're doing it kind of the Dove chocolate kind of way, and you're reading the little label and and thinking nice thoughts about yourself, and they're telling you, give in to your desires, indulge in yourself, of course, which means eat more of our chocolate. And that's part of that is the sensuality. The thinking that you do about how much I would like to have that next piece of chocolate. Whereas the actual eating of the chocolate doesn't take that much time. But you can spend hours thinking about chocolate. Now they have a vocabulary for chocolate, which is very much like the vocabulary for wine. They have the different overtones and the woody notes and the whatever notes you can get in chocolate. Did you see that New Yorker cartoon? This Neanderthal guy is in a cave and he's sniffing the broth that his wife has made. I'm getting notes of woolly mammoth. So that's the sensuality, is this fascination with thinking about the pleasures that these things will give. We have to have a resolve to get past that, and the state of mind that gets past that is right concentration. As the Buddha said, if you don't have the pleasure that comes from right concentration, then no matter how much you see the drawbacks of sensuality, you're still going to go back. You've got to have an alternative pleasure, which is the other main factor. That and right mindfulness, these are the ones that are directly related to the processes of fabrication here. Now, for some people think that mindfulness is simply being with whatever's coming up. Again, for the Buddha, mindfulness is a much more proactive process, and it's related directly to fabrication. If you're going to try to fabricate something skillful in the mind, one, you have to remember to do it, because it's so easy to forget. And two, you have to be alert to what you're doing, to notice what are you doing, what are the results you're getting. And then three, you have to be ardent in saying, I'm going to do this well, I'm going to stick with my original intention. So keep in mind what you've learned. Ardency is a wholehearted effort to apply your lessons of mindfulness correctly. And the alertness is to see what you're doing so that you see, am I applying this right? This way mindfulness actually relates not just to the present moment, but to all three time frames. In other words, you are mindful to remember lessons from the past. You are alert to what you're doing right now. And then in terms of ardency, you're trying to do it well for the sake of right now and on into the future. So all three time frames relate to what you're doing right now. There was a famous pianist, Alfred Brendel. Does anyone know him? Austrian classical pianist. He tended to be more intellectual than most piano players, and he was very good about analyzing what's going on, not only in a piece of music, but out of the process of what it is to play the piano. And someone interviewed him one time and said, what are you doing when you play the piano? And he says, basically, I'm alert to how I intended the piece to be shaped, and then how I was playing it up to this point. And I also have to be alert to how am I playing it right now? Does this fit in with my original intention? If I continue this way, is this going to go where I want it to go? Is it going to go someplace better? You've probably had that experience. You were going to play a piece, and as you get into it, you begin to go, this is better than I originally planned. Let's go with it. Other times you say, no, this shits. This is not working at all. So you have to be alert to what you're doing. And then ardent and say, I want to make sure that I do this well. So it's in the same way you're alert to the past, present, future as part of shaping this experience. You might say that what we're doing is we are learning the skill of shaping the mind as we meditate with reference to the past, present, and future. The need for mindfulness is being proactive as a guide to ardency. The Buddha actually gives some analogies that illustrate this point. One is when he talks about having your head on fire, and he says, you are mindful to put out the flames. Now, that does not mean you are just watching how beautiful the flames are and accepting the flames. You remember, you keep in mind that I got to get this out first thing, and there are other things can wait now. But for the time being, my head is on fire. I've got to put it out. Okay, one. The other analogy is mindfulness as a goad. Does anyone here know what a goad is? It's a stick with a sharp point at the very end. And in those days when you were plowing a field, you did not have a tractor, you had a water buffalo. And if the water buffalo was going off in the wrong direction, you stick it with a goad to make it go in the right direction. And so again, mindfulness is not just accepting the fact that the water buffalo is going off down into the canal. It's saying, no, we've got to get you back on track. A third analogy that the Buddha gives is of a gatekeeper, a wise gatekeeper who is in a fortress at the edge of the frontier, knows who to let in, who not to let in. There are spies and enemies on the edge of the frontier, so the gatekeeper has to know for sure. You don't let these people in. You let in only the people you can trust. I was reading a book one time by someone who was given the interpretation of mindfulness as basically an accepting state of mind. And he's saying, well, with the gatekeeper, all the gatekeeper has to do is just sort of sit there at the gate, and the enemy comes in and says, oh, they have a gatekeeper here, I will go away. It's like those mannequin policemen you see on the side of the road in some the towns that don't have enough taxes. It works the first time you drive past, right? You slow down. But once you look inside the car, you see, that's not a real person. It's never going to work again. The mindfulness as a keeper really does have to keep the people out. It has to be very active and can't just sort of sit there and accept whoever is coming in. As for the need for ardency, you see three different analogies for what you're doing as you're practicing meditation. Analogies for how you're going to achieve the unconditioned happiness. Two of them are false analogies, and there's one that's actually true. The two false analogies are, one, that you have to work hard in order to create the unconditioned. In other words, just putting in a lot of effort, you will create nirvana. Of course, if it's unconditioned, you can't create it. It makes no sense. The second one is you just relax into the unconditioned that is already there. It's just kind of waiting there for you to relax into it and you'll be fine. Again, this is not what the Buddha taught, because you've got obstacles in the mind that are preventing you from relaxing into it, and it's not something you relax into. The analogy John Lee gives, which is the correct one, is that it's like trying to get fresh water out of salt water. You don't just let the water sit there. You have to actively boil the water to get rid of the salt. And you need to create steam. Steam then comes back into as water again. So basically you're working hard at clearing away the obstructions to the unconditioned that is already there. So there's work involved. You're not creating an unconditioned, but you do have to work on your defilements and things that are getting in the way. So again, desire is going to be involved in this, and you simply have to learn how to use it skillfully, in the same way that you would use your desire when you're learning a manual skill. If you have developed a manual skill, you know that if you're simply desiring to get it right or getting it done is not going to get it done. And if the desire is too strong, it can actually get in the way. If the desire is too weak, nothing will develop. So you have to learn how to apply it just right and focus basically on the causes, and then the results will come. So when you're working in developing a state of mind concentration, you will be making a lot of adjustments to the mind, to the breath, to the conversation in the mind, and to the images that you're using in the mind, and to the breath itself. You will be adjusting these things in order to create a state, which you might call it the state of the art of shaping the present moment, using your breath, your thoughts, your perceptions and feelings, guided by mindfulness. This is what we're doing as we're meditating. Trying to use these different kinds of fabrications to create the state of mind that we want, i.e. one that is centered, still, but very alert. So you can see what's going on inside the mind, and then use that as a basis for gaining more insight. Are there any questions on what I've said so far? This is going to be a quick afternoon if there are no questions. Yes?
Well, it's very confusing for a Zen practitioner.
Yes.
Because the practice that I've often focused on or been taught in Zen is to simply sit, and watch everything go by.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're saying is that will not work.
That doesn't work.
You're saying Zen doesn't work.
I'm saying that interpretation of Zen doesn't work.
Okay. What would you say would be the actual true...
True Zen? Okay. Have you ever read Dogen talking about just sitting?
Does he talk about just sitting?
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's a great passage where he says, when you're sitting there, you have to keep asking yourself questions. Is the mind sitting in the body? Is the body sitting in the mind? And just basically ask questions about what's going on. What do you think you're doing? Are your perceptions correct? If they're not correct, then you can change them. It's a much more proactive thing. In other words, you take here I am sitting, I'm aware, I've got a body here, but wait a minute, who is this I who has the body? Am I in the body? Is the body in me? Questions like that. And that would be just sitting as a topic of meditation. There's another passage where he talks about, he defines Zen as, and this is the question of how you translate the passage, but I checked this with a Dogen expert one time, and he said it would work, which is that you're dethinking your thinking. In other words, you're questioning your perceptions. What is the perception I have about this? Is this a true perception? Can I look at it from another direction? That's much more proactive. And that's a lot of what we're doing here. Your perception, say your perception of the breath. We can perceive the breath simply as air coming in and out through the nose. That's one way of perceiving it. We can see breath as the energy flow in the body. You can then, we see it as energy flow in the body, what's the image you hold in mind as you're breathing in, breathing out? And you might think of the body as a sponge. You breathe in and the breath comes in through all the pores and it goes out through all the pores. Hold that perception in mind. What do you get? Which way of breathing is more comfortable? Or you can have the perception of the breathing as you are pulling the breath in. The breath is something that has to be pulled into the body. Or you can have the perception that actually breath energy is originating in the body itself, and as that breath energy expands through the body, that's what pulls the air in. So you focus on the breath energy that's already there. You play with the perceptions and you get a different experience. And then you ask yourself, which way is my mind calmer, more solid, more alert? There's a lot to play with. I had a Zen friend who was reading some of the stuff I wrote about meditation, and she says, these are the questions I've always wanted to ask, and I've always been told I shouldn't ask. Yeah. So, I must admit, I don't think much of modern Zen. But there's some old Zen masters who are pretty cool, but modern Zen, I think it's just has gotten way off the path. So now you know where I'm coming from. Yes.
When I meditate and sort of try to maybe evaluate how it's going, it feels very sort of neurotic maybe, and there's a lot of tension involved in how it's going. So lately I've been really looking at, I mentioned this last night, my sort of habit of wanting to succeed, and I was just feeling like maybe I'm just getting a little too bound up in it going right. And that's why it's feeling so intense. And so but putting that down and just sort of not engaging in that way of evaluating makes me feel very adrift, like I have no anchor or way to... And is that just something to get used to, or is there
No.
another anchor?
There is another anchor. The analogy you might want to think of is when the Buddha talks about trying to get milk out of a cow. Do you know that analogy? Yeah, you can either be twisting the horn of the cow, and you're not going to get any milk. And someone comes along and says, "Hey, you're twisting the horn of the cow. It's hard on you. It's hard on the cow." Why don't you stop twisting the horn? And you say, hey, Jay, I feel much more relaxed not twisting the horn. But you still don't get the milk. You got to figure, okay, when I'm putting in an effort, there must be something wrong with the way I put an effort in. Maybe I better turn around and look at that. And one way to go do that is, for the time being, just, okay, I'll just be with the breath as it is. And ask myself, when I'm evaluating, whose voice is in my head evaluating this, as to whether this is right or wrong. And if it's kind of a nasty Ajaan Geoff voice, you might say, no, I don't want the nasty Ajaan Geoff. I want the sort of nice Ajaan Geoff, who will tell you, hey, you're doing this to be comfortable. And if you're neurotic about getting comfortable, you're not going to get comfortable, but you can get comfortable with the breath. What would feel really good? Ask your body, ask yourself in the present moment. And you're not being measured from the outside. It's just the question, does this feel good? And when I'm doing it, do I feel alert? Those are the two questions you want.
And just sort of play with that in little ways?
Yeah, play with that. You can get control freakish about this, but that doesn't help. But, I mean, the wise people are the ones who control in kind of indirect ways, who don't exert, overt control over things, but say, well, how about this? How about that? So learn how to work with playing around, make it a play, something you play with. And ask yourself, what kind of breathing would feel really good right now? And what kind of parts of the body have I never breathed into before? Wouldn't that be fun to breathe into a new part of your body? How about breathing in through the spaces between your toes? Have you ever tried that? See? There was a woman I knew down in California who had Marfan syndrome, and she died, and I went to her memorial service. And a lot of people there were not just Buddhists, but also a lot of the Marfan community was also there as well. And they asked me to do a little guided meditation beforehand. And then this one woman got up and testified how, this woman, Cheryl, had helped her a lot when her nephew, who was suffering from Marfan syndrome, he was only 13 years old, but had to go in for a heart operation already. And he was coming out, and he was in a lot of pain. And the medications weren't helping with the pain at all. So Cheryl had to go into the hospital room and talk to the kid. And she said, breathe through your butt. and apparently that helped the kid with the pain. And then she turned to me and said, now I know where she got that idea. So play with this. It's not like the Buddha's up there with a stick saying, you've got to do this right or else. The whole point of this is, what kind of breathing would be enjoyable? And expand your conception about what's involved with breathing. That again gets into the issue of perception, which we'll explore a little bit more. Anything else?
You mentioned mental fabrications, and you mentioned feelings within that.
Mm-hmm.
If I break my leg, certainly the perceptions I create around that influence how I experience that feeling. But the negativeness of that negative feeling is not, in my view, necessarily something I create, but something sort of intrinsic to the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
That the fact that it's a negative feeling, I've created that in the past through the karma, but so I just wonder.
This is where you have to work with the perceptions around the feeling.
Yeah.
And one thing you can do is just not focus on that feeling. And then when you do focus on the feeling, you can ask yourself questions about it. Are you on, which side of the feeling are you on? Is the feeling coming at you? Is the feeling going away? Those kinds of things.
I guess I'm also just wondering, it seems like that feels like the odd one out in those categories. Does the whole rest of...
Well, I think what he's talking about here is the mental feeling, which does not have to be influenced by the physical feeling. Yeah. Anything else?
You talked about that pleasure concentration That's something that can counterbalance into the pleasures. And I wouldn't describe myself as having a pleasure of meditation in that realm. I certainly got the pleasure of satisfaction of learning and seeing things that I hadn't seen before, but not as much as physical comfort.
What you might do is, instead of sitting in meditation, sometimes lie down on your back. You know, like they do at the end of a yoga session, and say, just totally relax your body. And go down from the top. And just, okay, relax, 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 relax. And down the arms, and down the torso, and down the legs. And ask yourself, does this feel good? Then get up. Say, can I maintain that feeling when I'm sitting up?
That's interesting, because sometimes I'm stiff in the night, I'll just go to lie down on the floor, and it is very comfortable.
Yeah. And that's what you want to be able to do without having to lie down. And this is how monks can stay monks for long periods of time. We have the time to relax into our bodies and bliss out, and nobody knows. Anything else? Yes?
I recently listened to a teaching by Lumpur Pasana, and he was talking about renunciation and compassion as being two wings of a bird. And the thing that I learned in that teaching, that I thought of renunciation in a new way, and I'm wanting to see if I'm getting it, that in a way that you can also think of renunciation as, in meditation, putting down a hindrance, or not following it, and proactively steering your mind towards something
Better.
more wholesome.
Yeah, and particularly your fascination with sensual pleasures. You want to put that down, but then you want to replace it with the pleasure of concentration. In the back.
Yeah, you mentioned gatekeeper. I was just thinking about it. How do you recognize it allows in good and keeps the bad away? Should I develop that gatekeeper, or is it there? How do I...
You have to develop it. You learn the hard way.
So that's from experience?
That comes from experience. With the comment, someone had a great quote that I learned last month that I mentioned last night. I don't know if you were here. That good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. And you realize, that didn't work.
So I know inside myself the answer is just letting it naturally.
Well, again, you'll find yourself, oops, I made a mistake. Yeah. And learn from that the next time. Mary?
So I've worked with the mental chatter of the committee and the feelings that come up, and how to maneuver through the mental chatter by picking whichever committee member seems to be the most grounded, and then choosing to respond to either the world or my meditation through the wisest of the committee members. And so I've been working on that for quite some time. And lately, in the last several months, I've been finding myself not so interested. I'm just kind of getting tired of the committee. So I'm finding that I'm turning my attention more to, thank you very much for your opinion.
Thank you for sharing.
And then just choosing myself rather than going off into, I know it's all my own fabrication, but having a little bit more faith in not having to pick and choose amongst the committee, but just wait until it all settles down and then decide whether to take action or whatever I'm going to do just for myself, rather than picking up a particular fabrication. So you had said perceptions or tonal feelings are the mental chatter. I definitely have a tonal feeling when it settles down, committee's quiet, and that's what I'm actually going toward as far as my concentration now is going toward, okay, it's all calm and quiet, and we're all still here, but I'm relying on this tonal feeling of peace, or whatever. So is that still mental chatter?
There's still some going on. What you find, though, is that every member of the committee, because it is a type of becoming, is based on the desire for pleasure, or happiness, or however you're going to define that state of well-being. And the reason they have discussions is because they're not agreeing on what would be pleasant. And one way you can shut some people up is put candy in their mouth, i.e. breathe nicely, and a lot of them will just kind of calm down. It's the irritation that I don't feel right inside, something is wrong, I've got to do something about this. That's what keeps a lot of these members chattering. But if things are going well, and things are pretty comfortable, I mean, they're not interested in making any comments. Now, it doesn't mean they're not there, but it just means that they're quiet for the time being.
Right, and so I'm noticing that. I'm noticing they're still there.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also waiting for it all to calm down. And so that calm in itself is I'm experiencing as a tonal feeling. So there's definitely still a perception there.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Is it right to go ahead or is it right to go ahead and nourish that feeling?
Well, that's what the concentration is all about, is you try to create this sense of well-being so that when something comes up that's obviously at odds with it, you'll know. Now, you can't 100% trust everything the mind comes up with when it is calm. That's going to be your next level of discerning what's going on. Because sometimes what comes up is what feels right is what is habitual. And you might say, well, a minute, I've got to keep watching this. It's not quite as on top of things and trying to correct things, but you have to keep watch over when I follow through this sense of what feels right in the sense of that calm. Is it really right, or do I have to be a little bit more discerning than that?
And the discernment would be?
Just watching the results.
Right. And if any kind of stress arises, which actually, of course, there's stress just because there's a perception.
Right, but again, there's some perception, some stress is actually part of the path, some stress is opposed to the path, and this is where you have to sort things out on the next level. So
the next level, so at this time, I'm not at that next level, so at this time, I'm just discerning the path. What's on the path? And just,
what's on the path, what's not.
Yeah, and then just wait and see. The discernment, further discernment will make itself evident.
Well, again, if you keep looking at the results of what you're doing, I mean, say, well, gee, it felt right, but it didn't turn out right. Maybe something, I've got to go back and look at this feeling right that I've got.
For the last little while, I've been trying to work with what I'm probably hearing you describe as fuzzy concentration, where I'm getting a little bit too caught, I think, in the pleasure and not staying, putting the mindfulness to bear, basically. So working with intentionality and sort of the image that you gave about the water buffalo makes a lot of sense to me, because sometimes in my experience, even just in day-to-day experience, it feels like waking up from these thought worlds, like in the middle of reality, like, what's going on? And trying to train the mind where it's like, the water buffalo's in the ditch, let's get into the ditch and get it moving forward. And I was wondering if you could say a bit more about that training, and I think what I've been trying to work with, because I think it's been tricky to keep myself out of the fuzzy concentration, is just trying to work, just what you say with your instructions of feeling the body and doing basically 5-minute meditations, of being all in for these 5 minutes, because maybe that's all I've got, and hoping that over time that gets stitched together and maybe fixes that concentration. I just wanted to check if that's skillful means or if there's anything else to say.
Yeah, that's how you do it. The thing is, once it gets comfortable, you've got to give the mind work to do. Okay, you've rested a little bit, but if you start getting really rested, you then begin to drift off. And this is where you might want to go into, okay, where are parts of the body where the breath is not going? If you want to switch from the breath a bit, you can switch into thinking about where are my bones in my body right now? And just chase the bones from the toes up through the legs. Give the mind something active to do in the present moment in the body. So you're not just kind of drifting into, because what happens is when the mind begins to drift, first its range of awareness shrinks. And then as the range of awareness shrink, then it can go off into other places. So if you fill the body with your awareness, that's one activity you can give yourself, is everything. And then you say, okay, when is the next distracting thought going to come on? I've got to be alert to that, and give yourself that job to do. That's kind of like being a spider on a web. There's a little quiver on the web, and you go over and you zap the fly, and you come back. There'll be a little quiver of a thought beginning to come up as you go and you zap that, breathe through it, and come back. And that gives you something to do to keep you calm and alert at the same time. Because once you've got something good like this, you say, "Good, now I've got to protect it. I can't just trust in the universe to leave me alone while I'm drifting off." Because again, the members, the committee members of the mind say, "Okay, now's my chance. She's not watching." So it's give yourself work to do, basically.
Yeah, I think it's in that act of, oh, there's something good, I have to protect it, and then that's sort of where it falls apart a little bit.
Okay, well then learn how to protect it wisely. So, okay, I'll just be right here. I'm going to be solid inside the body, and things will come up. You may have noticed sometimes that when a thought forms, it's not just in the mind, there's also a physical component to the thought. Breathe through that physical component as soon as you catch it. And be kind of on top of that. Because there is a kind of intense concentration that's very pleasant of, okay, I'm here ready for whatever's going to come along. See if that helps. Okay, we can look briefly at the passages that were related to what I just said. The first one, all phenomena are rooted in desire. Now, this is the basic principle that underlies the whole process of fabrication, the whole process of becoming. And they come into play through your attention. It's what you're paying attention to is what's going to determine how they go. Okay. So what is the origination of fabrications? That's passage 2. There are basically two different explanations of what here in passage 2 and passage 3. Passage 2, fabrication comes from the process of relishing, welcoming, and remaining fastened to things. In other words, by the fact that you want these fabrications to come, that's what's going to give rise to them. And they disappear when you develop dispassion for them. Okay. Passage 3 talks about fabrication being as what they call the 6 bodies of intention. Intentions with regard to form, sound, smells, taste, tactile sensations, and ideas. Okay. Now the intentions that create concentration come into that last one. The word idea here is Dhamma, which can also mean mental quality. And so we're going to be working on intentions giving rise to a quality of concentration. Now these things come into origination from contact. The word contact here can either mean contact at the senses or contact between various elements in the mind. Like when an intention and attention, active intention and active attention make contact in the mind, the possibility for fabrication, the possibility for an intention comes up from that. Or a perception makes contact with a feeling, and then you want to do something about that. That also is a kind of a contact that goes on. Passage 4 gets into this process of fabrication, takes things from a potential and creates them into your actual experience. For the sake of formness, they fabricate form as a fabricated thing. For the sake of feelingness, they fabricate feeling. You've got these potentials coming in and you want to make something out of them. You want to make them into a particular feeling or a particular form, because then you can do something with them. The question is, why does the Buddha focus on these 5 activities? Form, feeling, perception, fabrication, and consciousness? Because there's so many other mental activities that he could also analyze. And I think this relates to the fact that these, when you are feeding on something, these are the 5 things that are really active. You've got the form of the body, which you're trying to maintain, and you've got the form of the food out there that you're going to eat. Feeling is the feeling of pain you have when you're hungry, and the feeling of pleasure you want to create by eating. Perception is one, perceiving what kind of hunger do I have right now. Is it hunger for something salty, something sweet? Is it hunger to go off at a fancy restaurant and show off to my friends? There's that great passage on what sharing used to be. In the past, we used to share food. You would actually give somebody food, and now you share your picture of your food. Is that what you're hungry for right now? You want to share your picture? See what I'm eating? Ha ha ha. So what kind of hunger do you have? You have to label it. This is the hunger I have right now. And then what kind of food out there would actually satisfy my hunger? In fact, this is how we originally go through the world as children, going through. You crawl across the wall, crawl across the floor. Your parents are crawling across the wall. You're crawling across the floor. You meet something. What do you do with it? You stick it in your mouth to see if it's food. In other words, that's your first perception, is edible and inedible. And then our perceptions kind of work their way out from that. But those are the basic categories of perception. You think your mother is edible. And then you find out differently later on. Okay. And then there's fabrication. You get the food, and what do you do with it? Some foods you can eat just as they are, other foods you have to fix. That's fabrication. And then finally consciousness, which is aware of all these things. These activities are the basic activities for feeding. And actually not only physical feeding, but also mental feeding, emotional feeding. Which is why we want to have these activities active all the time, because these are the means by which we navigate through the world to get the nourishment we want. So from the potentials coming in from the past, we create these aggregates so that we can use them. Passage 5 goes into the 3 types of fabrication that I just mentioned: bodily, verbal, and mental. And then finally, passage 6 is the question of right resolve. Right resolve here exists on 2 levels. There's what's called mundane right resolve, which is resolve for renunciation, resolve for non-ill will, resolve for harmlessness. Now, renunciation here, as I said earlier, is to renounce sensuality. Years back, I was going through some Buddhist books and looking up the word renunciation in the index to see what they had. And it was very rare that you'd have renunciation in an index to a Buddhist book. The few places where they did appear, one was learning how to renounce your controlling mindset, and the other was learning how to renounce unhealthy relationships. Now, you don't need the Buddha to tell you those things. Unhealthy relationships, your parents will tell you to renounce them. Controlling mindset, your psychotherapist will tell you to renounce them. The Buddha is telling you, renounce your fascination with thinking about sensuality. And that goes a lot against the grain, which is why we need right concentration to provide us with an alternative pleasure, so that actually it's okay to stop thinking about the chocolate or the pizza or whatever down the road. That's mundane right resolve. Transcendent right resolve is when you actually get the mind into the first level of concentration. It's defined here as the thinking, directed thinking, resolve, mental fixity, mental transfixion, focused awareness, and verbal fabrications, i.e. directed thought and evaluation of one developing the path. Okay, in this case, he's talking about the first jhana there. These are the qualities of the first level of concentration. So in this way, right resolve shades into right concentration. Yes?
Where are you on your pages?
Excuse me?
I lost track.
Okay, we're in passage 6 on page 2. So any questions before we dive into breath meditation? Yes?
So we're not going for zero sensuality, right?
Well, no, I mean, Try to do with as little as possible. I mean, as a householder, you have to decide what kind of food we're going to buy. You have to do some sort of planning around that. What kind of house am I going to live in? For the monks, we have less choice in that. This is one of the first lessons I learned as a monk, is thinking about what I really like to eat today. I was setting myself up for all kinds of suffering. I said, I mean, it's good enough that somebody's giving me something to eat at all. But you want to look at yourself. To what extent are you just, indulging in the fascination with thinking about sex or food or whatever? And to what extent is that actually making you more inclined to do unskillful things in order to get that? Whatever. That's what you got to watch out for. And the more you can have a sense of well-being that comes, I can just sit here and breathe. Then when you get into situations where there's not much sensual pleasures being offered, you say, well, I still have the pleasure of learning of being able to breathe okay. They haven't privatized that yet. And you remember all those rumors going around about detention centers that were being built during the Bush era? If they ever do pull us off, the Buddhists have to get put off to detention centers, we still have our breath. Okay, the breath meditation. One time when the Buddha was talking to a group of monks saying they should meditate on the breath, and the one monk said, I meditate on the breath. And this particular monk was one who was known for not being that advanced a monk. So the Buddha asked him, what kind of breath meditation do you do? And the monk said, I put away thoughts of the past, hopes for the future, and I just focus on being okay in the present moment as I breathe in, breathe out. And the Buddha said, okay, there is that kind of breath meditation, but it doesn't give the best results. And then he goes and he lists these 16 steps that are listed in passage number 17. Passage number 7. Okay. I'll just go down the 16. Notice they are divided into 4 tetrads. The first one is when you breathe in long, you discern you're breathing in long, breathing out long. Second one, you discern you're breathing in short or breathing out short. And then you train yourself, and every step from here on is a training, i.e. you make up your mind, you intend to do it in this particular way. I will breathe in and out sensitive to the entire body, or I will breathe in and out calming bodily fabrication, in other words, calming the breath. Okay, that's the first tetrad. The second tetrad is down in the next paragraph. I will breathe in and out sensitive to rapture. And how do you breathe in a way that you actually give rise to a sense of rapture? The word Pali is piti, which can also mean refreshment. Sometimes rapture is a little bit too extreme. It sounds like St. Teresa. Now, some people actually do have feelings of very intense rapture when the mind settles down, but that's not necessary. Sometimes it's more just a sense of feeling really, really refreshed by the breath. So how do you breathe in a way to feel refreshed by the breath? I will breathe in and out sensitive to pleasure. I will breathe in and out sensitive to mental fabrication. In other words, you're sensitive to feelings and perceptions, and noticing how they are having an impact on the mind. And then finally, I will breathe in and out calming mental fabrications. What kind of feelings calm the mind? What kind of perceptions calm the mind? Those are the questions you ask, and then you try to find out ways of breathing that will answer those questions. In the third tetrad, you notice the first tetrad has directly dealing with the breath. The second tetrad is dealing more with feelings. The third tetrad is dealing with the mind. I'll breathe in and out sensitive to the mind. I'll breathe in and out gladdening the mind, steadying the mind, or releasing the mind. We'll go into more detail in a minute about that, but basically it's what does the mind need at any particular point? Is the mind feeling sort of depressed and sluggish? Okay, how do you gladden the mind when it's beginning to go off in that direction? If the mind is getting too restless, how do you steady the mind? Which would be the second one. If the mind is feeling burdened by something, how do you release it from that burden? As you breathe in, as you breathe out. And then finally, the fourth tetrad, these are following the different frames of reference in the establishing of mindfulness. The fourth tetrad has to do with dharmas, or mental qualities. Here is, I'll breathe in and out focusing on inconstancy. I'll breathe in and out focusing on dispassion. I'll breathe in and out focusing on cessation, and I will breathe in and out focusing on relinquishment. These 4 steps actually follow on that last step about releasing the mind. In order to release the mind from something, you want to focus on, what is this thing that's burdening the mind? Is it constant or inconstant? You see that it's inconstant. And from being inconstant, you see that it's also stressful and not self. So you can develop some dispassion for it, which is the next step. When you realize, I really don't need to keep fabricating this state of mind, I can stop it. And it's because you had passion or desire for it that you're fabricating. When you can develop dispassion, it stops the fabrication of that particular burden. And then you can, relinquishment is when you actually let go not only of the thing that was burdening the mind, but you let go of the whole issue. It was all the activity that you had to do in order to stop that. Now you can let go of that as well. You can put it down. Now that can deal with specific burdens that are coming into the mind at any one particular time, or it can deal with the path itself at the very end of the practice. I mean, you've been using the path to develop dispassion, and once that dispassion is total, you can let go of the path too. And then the mind is freed. So those are the 16 steps in the Buddha's instructions on breath meditation. You notice they're very proactive. A lot of training the mind to breathe in this way, training the mind to breathe in that way. They're things you're going to be doing, something you're going to be fabricating. As I said earlier, the 4 tetrads deal with the 4 frames of reference in the process of establishing mindfulness: body, feelings, mind, and mental qualities. It's also a description of how you get the mind into right concentration. You're bringing concentration, mindfulness, and insight all together in one thing. You might look at these things as 4 dimensions in getting the mind to settle down. It's not the case that you do 1, 2, 3, 4 first, and then 5, 6, 7, 8 next, and so on. You've got, when you're sitting here meditating, it's not like you have just the body and say, okay, now that I've got the body, now I'm going to bring in feelings. Now that I've got feelings, now I'm going to bring in the mind. They're all there to begin with. And the question is, when you're trying to get the mind to settle down, which is the problem? Is the breath the problem? Are my feelings the problem? Is my mind state the problem? Those are the 3 things you're bringing together. And then the issue of the Dhammas is, okay, what can I do to, what knowledge of Dhamma can I bring in to help bring these things together? You're trying to create a state in concentration where you've got your awareness filling the body, you've got a sense of feeling, a pleasure filling the body. So you've got these 3 things that you're trying to bring in together, to get together. And you've got that 4th frame of reference, which is what helps you figure out, what do I need to do to adjust, to make sure that these things get together and stay together well. So at any one time you say, my mind is not settling down. Is the problem the breath? Is the problem that there's a feeling of pain here? Or is the problem that my mind has got a lot of issues coming in from the day that I've got to deal with first? So that gives you a sense of which of the tetrads you're going to be focusing on at any one time. So see them as 4 dimensions to the practice. And then the question is, which one is going to deserves the most attention right now? There's a common pattern in each of the tetrads, is you're sensitizing yourself to that particular aspect. You're breathing in and out, conscious of what does the breath feel like. We breathe in and out, conscious of what am I feeling right now. You breathe in and out, conscious to how my mind is right now. You sensitize yourself to that. Then you begin to realize there's a certain kind of fabrication going on here. You've got bodily fabrication in the first tetrad. You've got mental fabrication in the second tetrad, which then gets applied to the third tetrad. You're going to be trying to fabricate the mind either to steady it or gladden it or release it. So you become sensitive to the process. I'm actually doing things that are creating the problems right now. Let's undo them. And then once you've gotten sensitized to the process of fabrication, then you calm that process. Calming bodily fabrication, calming mental fabrication. So it's sensitizing, realizing that there's a certain fabrication going on here, and you learn to calm that fabrication. This is how you get the mind to settle down. This is why this is a combination of what they call samatha and vipassana at the same time. Samatha, or tranquility, or calm, is basically concerned with getting the mind to calm down, whereas vipassana is learning how to see things in terms of fabrication. So if you're calming the fabrications, you're doing both at the same time. You understand, oh, I'm actually having an active role in creating this problem, and I can have an active role in solving the problem by calming it down. So that's a general introduction to those 4 tetrads. Before we go into the tetrads in detail a little bit more, any questions about that general picture?
So we're using the fabrication to calm the fact that we're fabricating.
Yeah.
From as far as it's kind of stuck.
Okay, let's unstick you.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's, for instance, with your breath. I'm sitting here breathing. Does that feel good? No. Yeah, how about calming it down? Now, there's a little conversation going on inside. That's direct thought and evaluation. Does this feel good? No. Now, why am I breathing this way? I'm going to just change the way I breathe. Okay, I'll try calming down the way I breathe.
So I guess where I'm going back to, you probably already answered this, but I'm not getting it. Going back to, the committee and calming, recognizing that these are committee members that I'm fabricating. I'm uninterested in engaging at a particular point. I'm just uninterested in engaging with anyone on the committee right now. Let's just calm down. Focusing on recognizing I'm fabricating this sense of calm as the committee calms down. This is my point of practice right now. And as I begin to move into the world, trying to bring that sense out with me. So knowing that I'm fabricating it, but not having to pull up an individual whatever, but just use the discernment that came and saw that in the first place. So applying discernment to my actions. But just still I'm still fabricating. I want to stop fabricating.
Okay, well that's what the calming of the fabrication is. There'll be a certain amount of fabrication going on. And you say, wait a minute, I don't have to do all of this.
Yeah.
So let's just kind of calm down. So the question is, what is a calming bodily fabrication right now? What is a really calming way to breathe right now? Does it need to be long and slow, or shallow and light?
Right, so I feel I can do that. I just can't seem to get beyond fabricating
You're not going to get beyond fabricating until you reach stream entry. I mean, there's always going to be some fabricating. And ultimately there will come a point, so I'm just sick and tired of all of this. And if the mind is well enough balanced at that point, you can see there's an alternative where you don't have to fabricate. But in the meantime, unless you hit that, you say, well, I've got to be fabricating, but let's try to do this in as skillful a way as possible. Question?
I'm the world's greatest proliferator. And it seems like a lot of analysis. When just the word relax or calm or let go seems to me does the trick. Trying to make an analysis as to where those proliferations are coming.
Okay, you might find it useful, though, to ask yourself at some point, okay, I still have to think about issues, but can I think about them calmly? And this is when it's good to say, okay, I'm going to calm the breath as I still think. Or has a time come and say, I'm just going to learn how to think in a way that's going to make me stop thinking. And that's what the analysis is for. I mean, it's figuring out, here's a problem. You can have kind of a blanket idea, okay, I just got to calm down. But then there are other times when you actually have to do some work, but you want to learn how to be calm in the midst of that work. And this is where it's good to be able to divide this. Okay, this is bodily fabrication. This is the breath that I'm calming down while I'm thinking about these other things. And at other times I say, well, that particular train of thought is one that I've got to learn how to just kind of let go. But I do have to work on other things. Because if the only alternative is proliferating all the time or just kind of calming down, you're left with a lot of without the alternatives you may need at a time when you actually have to think or actually have to engage in the world. So it's good to get kind of an intuitive sense. And in the beginning that sounds very analytical, but after all you get very intuitive about it. You learn how to read yourself better. So you know, okay, this is what I have to do right now. I'm thinking in ways that are driving me crazy. Even though the breath is calm, but the thinking is still going on. I've got to learn how to de-think that thinking. Try another perception. Like we talked about last night, the part of the mind says you've got to worry about X, because if you don't worry about X, the world is going to collapse. And you say, wait a minute, when the world collapses, it's going to collapse in a way that I've never anticipated, in which case I need to be alert and mindful and discerning at that time. These are qualities I'll have to bring into that. So what I need to do is just learn how to develop my mindfulness and alertness and discernment, working with the breath right now, rather than worrying about whether it's going to be an atomic war, or whether the bugs are going to take over, or the robots are going to steal all our jobs, or whatever. In any of those cases, you need a lot of mindfulness and alertness. My fear, of course, is they're going to replace meditation teachers with a robot. I know somebody who just got a brand new iPhone, and one of the free apps they offer, right up top, mindfulness app. They're pushing us out of business. Yes, question? Yeah.
In the four here
Mm-hmm.
that we're talking about, can you relate that to right effort? It feels very connected in preventing aneurysm
Right.
state in the four efforts. I'm trying to tease them apart, and I don't quite understand the difference.
Well, you would apply all kinds of right effort to all four of these categories. So in the sense that, if you find that you're fabricating a breath that is not good, okay, that's something, and that's an unskillful quality that's already arisen, and you try to abandon that. And then you figure out what would be a skillful way of breathing right now. That's a skillful quality that has not yet arisen. You try to give rise to it. Once you've got it, how do you maintain it? And as you and not only maintain it, but how you develop it. You develop to make it more calm, more and more and more calm. So in each of those cases, each of the four tetrads involves all four of the types of right effort. Okay. Yes.
Thank you. This instruction is really valuable to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to get clearer about the gatekeeper.
Mm-hmm.
I'm aware that to be a compassionate person, you have to have empathy
Mm-hmm.
with support. And what happens to me is I tend to pick up other people's energies and problems
Mm-hmm.
and become consumed
Mm-hmm.
by it. I find it very difficult to deal with sometimes. I sit in meditation, I think that I've cleared my mind during the day, and then I sit in meditation, and there's that person and all their problems and their energy
Mm-hmm.
sort of subsuming my own mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it really difficult to get back to that clarity
Mm-hmm.
that is without all of that. And I mean, how do you do it without shutting people out of your life altogether?
Well, you have to learn how to be with them and be present to them, but not allow them in. And this is where the breath can be very useful. You can maintain, this is my body, this is my breath. I'm not going to feel compelled that in order to be empathetic with them, I have to let their energy into me. And this is one of the places where a lot of us go wrong. If I'm not feeling what I think they're feeling at the same time, then I won't know what to do. Actually, you're just creating a lot of misery inside. This is not helping them at all. And so you have to say, okay, their energy is there. And by breathing through, a comfortable way through my body, I'm really inhabiting my whole body. Their energy is not going to penetrate. but I'm present and I can see where they are, what they're doing, and I can, from that point of view, I might be in actually even a better place to feel what they, to provide what they need. So you've got to watch out from the very beginning. Don't absorb their stuff under the mistaken belief that in order to be empathetic, I've got to absorb it first before I can know what's going on.
Right. Yeah, I always feel like I have to understand that completely where they're coming from.
Well, you can understand it. You say, I'm going to be in my space fully, and I'm going to watch them very carefully. Because when you fully inhabit your space, once you get used to that, then there's not a lot of fabrication going on in the mind. You're there, present. And now you can give all your attention to them. At the same time, you protect yourself. An image that might help. There was one of the cooks in the kitchen at the monastery where I lived in Thailand had a friend who had been trying to meditate for many, many years. And every time she'd sit down to meditate, she'd start shaking like this. And so she came to visit my teacher one time, and sure enough, she sat down and started meditating, was shaking. And my teacher turned to one of his students who was quite psychic, and he says, check her out. And so she sat and meditated, and she saw these two beings behind her shaking her like this. And so she, in the vision, she wanted to talk to them and say, why are you doing this? You leave her alone. And they turned on her. It scared her so much that she went out and threw up. She came back in to see Ajaan Fuang, and she told what had happened. He said, you fool, you have to protect yourself first. He said, either fill your body with a sense of good breath energy, or in her case, she actually had a sense of light that would go along with the breath energy. So fill yourself with that. Spread goodwill to those beings, and then talk to them. So that's what she did. And the two beings said, look, she was our child in a previous lifetime, and she murdered us. And now we're afraid if she meditates, she's going to get away from us, so we've got to stop her. And so she asked, well, what can she do that would make you stop doing this? And they said, well, build a Buddha image. And the problem was we were building a Buddha image at the monastery at the time. And so Ajaan Fuang told the woman, so we can't tell her that, and it sounds like we're trying to use your psychic powers to get money for the monastery, so we just have to leave her alone. And fortunately, a few years later, another friend of hers got her involved in building a Buddha image, and the shaking stopped. But think about that. Protect yourself first, lots of goodwill. But don't let them invade your space. Yeah. Yes?
I'm wondering if you could just make a little clearer for me with the contrast between the second and third tetrads. I think, like in my experience, I think of like suffusing the body with pleasure and rapture, and kind of how that leads into gladdening the mind, feel that out.
Why do you have to have them divided? You're taking care of both at the same time.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Think of it as 3 dimensions of one process. There's going to be an interplay among all 3. Yes.
You were speaking earlier of the point in practice where you let go of fabrication itself, the process of fabrication. Is it, the way we talk about fabrication, as you've spoken about it today, that part makes sense to me. At the point that you are instructed to let go of fabrication itself, can you tell me what actual activity that refers to, or is it just intuitive at that point you know how to do that?
No, at that point it's going to come as a surprise.
Say that again.
When it comes, it's going to come as a surprise.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because you will realize up to that point, everything you have ever done is fabricated to one extent or another.
So it's more of an insight than a...
It's a sudden insight. You say, oh, I didn't realize that. And the closest you can get as an analogy is, the Zen story about climbing up the flagpole. And you're up at the top of the flagpole and there's something crawling up behind you. What do? If you're going to let go of the flagpole, you have to let go of gravity at the same time. Which is why you're holding your head in your hands already. In other words, it comes as such an unexpected thing that you could actually do that at that point. So there's no way you can say this is how you do it. But when it happens, you say, oh, there's this possibility, and then you'll see, because it'll kind of open for you.
On a second note, you had mentioned that in one of the tetrads it was actually describing the jhana factors. Could you just explain how does the process of experiencing the jhanas teach us to let go of fabrication, or how does it function on the path as a tool for insight ultimately?
Well, because it could put you in a place where you're very, very, very sensitive to fabrication. You realize, oh, as you get into one state of concentration and you move to the next one, you begin to realize, oh, I was actually putting that together, and there were certain things that I was doing to maintain that I didn't really see. But now as I drop them, I see, oh, this is what I was doing. In fact, that's one of the ways insight develops, is as you go from one to the next, you say, oh, I was doing that, but I didn't see it. So it makes you calm enough so you can see subtle fabrication. That's how it helps. Mm-hmm. Yes?
Might it be possible to replace the word fabrication with conditioning?
It's not quite the same thing. There is actually an element that you are putting this together.
Okay.
So it's not just your past conditioning coming in, everything that conditioned you to be Margaret Darby. Yeah. But it's your process right now, how I'm putting things together right now.
I think I'm getting a little bit confused with the I part. Yeah.
Well, there's going to be an I behind the fabrication.
Sure.
And you're
It's not behind conditioning.
yeah, but it's in the conditioning. It sounds like it's more like you are the victim of conditions from the past.
I see what you're saying.
And here you're more an active process, and because one of the things you're going to see is how much active stuff you're doing to put this stuff together. Rather than thinking about, well, I was conditioned by my American upbringing or whatever. No, I'm still making these choices. So. Yes?
I'm wondering, there's a place that I'm stuck in my meditation. Sometimes when I follow my breath, I can get into a very settled, very bright state of mind. And sometimes I have chronic pain, and then it sort of releases the pain.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes whatever I'm doing, I'm amplifying it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering if you can speak to, I don't know, some thoughts on what I might be doing when it's sort of the focus. Sometimes it almost feels like maybe filling a balloon too full or something. You know, like it's sort of filling it up, and maybe there's some way that I could be curious or thinking about it differently.
Okay, that's when you want to change your mental fabrication around the pain, i.e. your perceptions around the pain. And I was actually going to do that when we get into the second tetrad.
Okay.
Cool. So let's just go down the different tetrads and sort of kind of nuts and bolts issues in the different tetrads. Okay. So the first tetrad is basically about being very sensitive to your breath, and this is going to be the focal point around which everything else gathers. In the first two steps, as I said, you are simply discerning differences in the breath. Now, the Buddha lists long breaths and short breaths. Now, you can expand this to the whole rest of the list that I mentioned this morning. Deep, shallow, heavy, light, fast, slow. And you want to see, okay, when I breathe in this way, what is the impact it's having on the body? That's teaching you how to sensitize yourself to what's going on with the breathing. From that point on, you will be training yourself. In other words, okay, once you say from this point on, I am intentionally going to breathe in this way. Now, notice in the instructions there, they never mention verbal fabrications. They talk about bodily fabrications and mental fabrications. But these instructions you give to yourself, I will breathe in and out doing this, I will breathe in and out doing that, that's verbal fabrication. So you've got all three going on. So these are different ways of verbally fabricating the way you engage with the breath. That third step was you're breathing in and out sensitive with the whole body. This relates to the imagery they use when they talk about jhana. The image for the first jhana is you've got a bathman who is putting together what they call the soap powder of the day. In those days they didn't have bars of soap. If you're going to bathe, they would take a soap powder and then they would mix it with water until you had kind of a dough. I don't know what the binding agent was, but it was a dough that that you would just kind of rub over your body. And so the bathman has to mix this flour-like thing. It's kind of like making bread. Mix the flour with the water so that the water works its way all the way through the dough and there's no dry part left, and yet it's not dripping out. And the image they give is once there's a sense of pleasure in the body, you try to fill the whole body with that sense of pleasure. In the same way that the bathman would work all the water into all of the dough. And so when you're trying to be aware of the whole body, it's not just being aware of the whole body, be aware of the breath energies in the whole body and trying to get them to work together. Are they working at cross purposes? Is this one part of the body not connecting to another part? You're trying to work that through. So you're aware of the whole body breathing and the whole body breathing out. And here's where perception comes in, because as I said earlier, these categories are not strictly divided. Your perception of the fact that the body, that breathing can be a whole body process, that will be a very helpful perception to hold in mind at the time. There's a question is, how do you spread your awareness through the whole body? There will be a problem sometimes as you spread your awareness through the whole body, and this may have to do with your problem with the pain, that you feel that you're filling up the body and you're exerting pressure on the body as you fill your awareness through the body. Okay, that's a problem. You have to think the awareness can go in without exerting anything, pressure on anything at all. And try to hold that perception in mind. Try to think of the breath as, what can go through the spaces between the atoms in your body. And it's kind of slip around without having to exert any pressure on it. Because if you think that to be fully aware of the whole body, I've got to put pressure on it, that's going to create troubles. Okay. Okay. Think of it more of the different parts of the body opening up to your awareness. The other question, of course, is how do you spread the breath energy? Again, you don't want to squeeze it or push too hard on it. Visualize the body as having breath channels, or big. I found think of it as being porous, so the breath can go through without exerting any pressure. It is possible that as you're trying to do this, a sense of rapture will come up. And the beginning symptoms sometimes of a sense of rapture is your body gets distorted. That you suddenly feel like it's filling the whole room, or it's very, very small, or one part of the body is missing. I was sitting with a group of people meditating with my teacher one time, and at the end of the session, during the meditation, I've been feeling like I was just a head, and my body had kind of disappeared. And at the end of the session, this one woman spoke up and said, I sit here feeling I'm just a body, I've lost my head. So we should get together. Sometimes excess rapture will come up. This, of course, is related directly to the second tetrad, but when you're focusing on the breath, this will happen. There's a sense of excess rapture comes up. Think of the channels going out the palms of your hand, the soles of your feet, and going out the eyes are all wide open. So the excess energy has a place to drain out. The other way of dealing with the excess is to think that, okay, this is kind of a gross level of energy in the body, but you can kind of tune in to a more subtle level. It's like tuning your radio. I don't know, what's the name of the hard rock station here in Portland? But anyway, you've got the radio tuned to that. You say, look, I want something more calming, I'll turn into Kebu. I guess Kebu is not all that calming right now. Whatever. Okay. So those are two ways of dealing with it. One is you open up the channels, and then you two think, I'm just going to tune into a more subtle level of energy that's here, and let the excess energy kind of boil itself off. Because what's the problem is you feel like you've got to contain the energy, and as soon as you put the container on it, it's like a pressure cooker, it's going to blow. So think, okay, everything is open, and I'm not going to contain this stuff, I'm just going to let it go. And then, of course, as I say, you're aware of the bodily fabrication, and then the next thing is trying to calm it. Before you calm the breath, you have to energize it. It's not made clear in this particular tetrad, but many other places in the canon, the Buddha will say, before the body is going to be calm, it first has to be energized. So if you're coming in and you're feeling really sleepy, and the first thing is not to calm the body even more. First you have to figure out, how do I breathe to energize the body? And then once it's energized, you say, well, now let's calm it back down. John Fuang's analogy was, you've got dogs that are kind of obstreperous. Well, you feed them, and then they lie down. Now, it may happen as you're calming the breath energy, the breath actually stops. You do want to check and make sure you're not stopping it because you think you've got to stop it, or that you're holding it down. It's simply that everything gets more and more balanced, more and more balanced, more and more balanced, and finally, without even realizing, you've stopped breathing, but it's very, very calm. And then you just say, well, I'll just allow this to stay here. If the body needs to breathe, it will breathe. Now, there's some question about what's actually going on in the body, why it's not breathing. And one of the theories is that there certainly is a certain amount of oxygen exchange going on at your skin. And when your mind is very, very calm, I mean, the brain is the main utilizer of oxygen in your body. When that's calm, then the amount of oxygen that's coming in through the skin and being picked up by the blood is enough to keep you going. So any questions on that first tetrad about breathing aware of the whole body and calming bodily fabrication? Okay, second tetrad is dealing with the feelings. How do you breathe in and out sensitive to rapture? The rapture here, John Lee describes it as a sense of fullness. And you might ask yourself, in what ways am I breathing that's getting in the way of feeling full of good breath energy? And two things are, one, that you subconsciously squeeze the end of the out-breath, and especially when you're focusing on the in and out breaths as part of the mind that wants to sort of make a very clear demarcation between the in and out breaths. And in doing that, it's not allowing a sense of fullness to arise. You just think about the out-breath will then flow into the in-breath, and the in-breath will flow into the out-breath, and there does not have to be a clear mark distinguishing them. One thing you can do is you can start with your hands and just relax your hands as much as possible, and so that they feel the same as the breath comes in, as the breath goes out. And you begin to notice it feels like the blood is filling the hands. You're not squeezing it in any way. And now allow that sense of fullness to seep up your arms. And then you try the same with your feet and allow that to come up the body. And you'll find that there's a strong sense of fullness that can come from that. And whatever you're doing that's putting a squeeze on those parts of the body, just let it go, let it go, let it go. And that gives you a sense of rapture. As for breathing in and out in a way that gives rise to pleasure, this is where perceptions come in to help. You can try different perceptions, as some I've already mentioned. One is the body as a sponge, which is so as soon as you breathe in, it's not like you've just got these two little holes that you've got to suck the breath through. And if those holes get clogged up, you're done. You've got breath energy holes all up around the body. Sometimes people will say, well, I breathe in and I can get the energy going only this far on the in-breath. Actually, once you breathe in, the breath energy has already gone to the whole body. So what you're thinking, what you're probably sensing as the breath energy coming in here is actually the movement of the blood. But if you think of the breath, as soon as you breathe in, it goes to the entire body. And that perception can also help make it a lot easier to breathe. You could think of the breath as energy originating from within the body rather than something you have to pull in from the outside. And you can also visualize the breath as an element that is not confined by the earth element of the body. In other words, you're not just stuck with what's inside the skin, but the breath can be kind of around the body as well. And that's an element that's there. And you don't have to use the breath to the physical or solid part of the body to control the breath. You can just allow it to come in and go out without having to be confined to the skin. Those perceptions can help a lot with the pleasure of the breathing. So you can use these 4 steps: being sensitive to pleasure, sensitive to rupture, pleasure, sensitive to mental fabrication, and calming of mental fabrication. You can use this dealing with pleasure in the concentration. In other words, thinking what kind of perceptions will make the mind more calm. What kind of pleasure makes the mind more calm? Can I get this more and more to a level of just equanimity, just being okay with the way things are? That will be calming to the mind. And you find that once you can do this, it helps bring the mind more under your control, because these good feelings and perceptions allow for the foundation of patience and endurance, so that when you're having to put up with difficult situations or putting up with physical pain, the fact that you have some pleasure that you can tap into when you need it makes you stronger and more capable of dealing with these things. As for dealing with pain, do we have to break sometime soon? Do you have a schedule? What? We broke at 2? Okay, well, let's break from 2:20 to 2:40. We'll come back. Okay. Then we'll deal with pain after that. Okay.